Welcome to our crime incident response section. Security officers can be called upon to respond to any type of a criminal incident, from lower level crimes such as shoplifting or vandalism to more serious crimes such as robberies or assaults. We want to be mindful of our overall response, but especially to serious or in-progress crimes, and that 3 to 5 minute period that we've already stressed in some of our other sections. And that 3 to 5 minute period, again, is that time period where the police will most likely be responding to our incident if it's of a serious nature. Incident response for security professionals will be different from the eventual response of the police. And security professionals want to be mindful that they don't confuse their role with the responding police officers. Some incidents initially responded to by security personnel may be quite similar to how the police would respond. Regardless, the police will take charge of a criminal incident upon their arrival. The police obviously have specialized training and legal authority to formally investigate a criminal act, and if necessary, to arrest and detain persons that might be involved or suspected of criminal activity. Depending on the severity and urgency of the incident, a security guard should gauge when it's appropriate to contact the police. Remember, again, our first responders being that finite resource we spoke about. We also don't want police responding to incidents that inherently are the responsibility of security officers. Security does not want to be seen as crying wolf. This is a balancing act in certain circumstances. If you're in doubt, a security guard should contact the police and let them decide how to proceed. Based on the circumstances, the actual victim of a crime may need to decide if they wish to proceed in contacting the police. If the crime involves only the victim, for example, a burglary to motor vehicle or a lost or stolen item from that person, they may or may not want the police to be involved. Some people simply prefer to not have police contact, and that's realistically their business. Regardless, such incidents should always be documented by security, along with preserving any evidence should it be necessary for a later police investigation. Some criminal incidents will require a police response without question. In-progress crimes, those involving violence, threats, or weapons, must immediately be reported. Crimes involving the guard and or the property being protected should also be reported to the police without delay to preserve evidence. Security personnel should be concerned about the following when they're responding and assisting the police. Again, securing that crime scene, potentially keeping people away from areas that need to be preserved or might be dangerous for them to enter, obtaining any suspect information that might be available, victim or witness information also. These people tend to go away from a crime scene at times very quickly, so any information that you can ascertain about them would be very important to pass along to law enforcement. One of the most vital resources will be your CCTV surveillance and reviewing that, trying to get a good idea of what actually occurred during the incident. You may even have only partial coverage, but anything that can help contribute to that investigation will be appreciated by law enforcement. And again, when they do respond, if you can assist with any kind of secondary issues. Sometimes there may be only 1 or 2 police officers that can respond to a scene, and there might be other things that are going on that maybe security can assist with. If there are additional people that are involved with the incident, or family members, so on and so forth, that are arriving at your scene, those are all things that potentially security can help assist with law enforcement at these scenes. Now we will break down some specific types of criminal activity. Again, the goal is not to make this a criminal justice or a law course, but it contributes to that professional relationship between security and law enforcement when they understand a little about each other's roles. In turn, understanding crimes will allow you to calculate severity of the incident and your response. So we'll begin with crimes against persons. Crimes against person or violent crimes are those which are committed by direct physical harm, force, or the threat thereof being applied against the victim. They are normally classified by degree depending on a variety of factors, and we often hear first degree, second degree, third degree. What does that all mean? Well, what amounts to that is the accuser's intent, potentially the seriousness of the injury. In other words, a offensive touching in Delaware would be somebody punching somebody else in the face. More serious crime, a third degree assault, a second degree assault would potentially be maybe taking a baseball bat and hitting somebody in the head. That would up the seriousness or degree of that crime. And again, that going along with the means to inflict the injury, what additional weapons might have been used, and then the age or profession of a victim can come into play as well. Anybody over the age of 65 in Delaware who was assaulted, that crime is automatically elevated to a felony level crime. Perhaps one of the most commonly misinterpreted crimes is robbery, which is taking or attempting to take anything of value by force, threat of force, or by putting the victim in fear. Robbery is a serious, violent, felony-level crime, and law enforcement's priority will be to stop the offender before they can act again, or perhaps even stop the crime that might be in progress. Most often, their response will be an immediate emergency response with lights and sirens, which is necessary, but it is dangerous to those responding and to the public as well. Therefore, being accurate in interpreting the details of a crime and reporting them accurately is important. Robbery is differentiated from other forms of theft, such as burglary, shoplifting, or vehicle theft, by its inherently violent nature. Also, a person is always the victim in a robbery. An object cannot be robbed. For example, I cannot rob your house. Put aside for a moment the idea of people occupying that house or dwelling. That would be a different story. But unoccupied, a house, a vehicle with no passenger, those things cannot be robbed. So people obviously often confuse robbery with theft. A robbery requires force or threat of force, while the theft is taking of property without the owner's consent, generally without their knowledge. Security guards should pay close attention to incident details to determine the difference. For example, if a person's purse is taken after that person set it aside on a table and walked away from it, that's a theft, not a robbery. In the retail industry, we would often get calls from retail tenants telling us that they were just robbed. And when we would ask them to explain it, they would be explaining that, there were 10 pairs of jeans or whatever on a front display case and they were removed. Somebody came in and they ran away with them. That's a theft. And obviously not a robbery. If the situation was where the suspect came in and he removed the items and a store clerk, for instance, happened to approach them and asked them to stop and they were threatened, or the suspect pulled a knife or a weapon, then that would be a robbery. Armed robbery involves an offender using a weapon, a knife, a gun, etc., to threaten a victim. For example, an offender points a gun at somebody and demands their wallet. Robbery using physical force does not involve a weapon, but occurs when an offender uses physical force to remove property. Offenders do not need to use or imply a weapon to commit a robbery. For example, an offender pushes a person to the ground and removes their wallet or purse would be an example of a strong-armed robbery or a robbery using physical force. Robbery also occurs should an offender put the victim in fear for their safety regardless of weapons or physical force. For example, an offender threatens to push a person down if they don't hand over their wallet and the person does so. That is also a robbery. Security professionals' response to a robbery for unarmed security guards is limited, being they are generally not armed with the same lethal force which may become necessary to defend against an offender willing to use the same. They also shouldn't be overly or unrealistically confident about weapons that they carry. Remember that OC spray and batons are less than lethal force defense tools, and someone with an edged weapon or a firearm is using deadly force. Security professionals need to be aware of their environments, their threat environments. If they're operating in an area where robberies are more likely or they might be vulnerable to them, are they at businesses or around persons or properties that have large sums of money, valuable merchandise moved to, from, and around the property? These are all things you want to consider about your potential threat environment. So some important factors to consider when responding to offenses against a person, including physical altercations, assaults, attacks, crimes in progress, crimes involving weapons. Unarmed security professionals, again, should never consider knowingly intervening in an incident involving a firearm or an edged weapon, as that officer has no other recourse or a method to defend themselves. They must also consider the risk to their personal safety when interacting during other physical, non-weapon altercations as well. Your overarching objective during an edged weapon or firearm incident should be to keep yourself safe, or any incident that you're responding to. You want to help others move away while still being aware of your personal safety at the same time. If you're aware of an edged weapon or a firearm attack that has not yet become an attack, or you're aware of somebody that has that type of a weapon present, somebody's been spotted in possession of it, displaying it, your priority is to divert others from the area while you await police response.
Odie Wally.
Why are you running up? You got a hole. You got a Yeah, I do. Give me my hair. I'm a crack. Give me my hair.
Odie Wally.
Oh,
she wildin'. Oh, she wildin'. She wildin'. Yo, Odie Wally, bro.
So the snippet of video that you just seen was actual footage from a altercation that was occurring inside a department store. This is something that a security guard potentially could be responding to or walk up upon or be notified about, and how it actually occurs. And just for the sake of argument, put yourself in the idea of being in that situation where that's what you're coming up on. You want to always be aware in these kind of situations, a weapon may have been introduced to the incident as a possibility. If people are willing to get that agitated and that angry with each other and resort to violence, there is always the potential for them to be able to turn to a weapon. You want to obviously request backup from other officers or the police right away, and if possible you want to use your verbal commands from a safe distance or greater to encourage combatants to disengage. If and when it is safe, you want to potentially attempt to separate feuding parties, again if that's possible, and your other priorities would be including any type of medical attention that you might be able to give, obtaining any of that witness or contact information, reviewing that CCTV, or having a dispatcher doing it. And above all, just remember again, don't take any sides, as you might not be aware of what actually provoked that incident. It could have been something that happened, in a schoolyard or through social media or other means. You never really know what you're rolling up upon. Some other observations about physical altercations. When you're approaching them as a security guard, you're giving those verbal commands from a safe distance. What that allows you to do is be able to give those warnings to the people that are involved that they need to stop. It also serves a public relation factor as well. The people from the public are able to see you as a security personnel responding to that scene, attempting to do whatever you can, but also you're preserving your physical safety at the same time. Also, keep in mind, people that are having these type of altercations, unless they're professional fighters, this realistically isn't going to go on for more than 30 seconds to a minute. Generally speaking, that's not a hard and fast rule, but what you want to also look out for is if something does calm down before people get their second wind and something reignites. All right, you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye out for that as well. Maybe potentially trying to separate those parties so that can't happen as well. All these things that you want to try to keep in mind. And then there are those incidents that aren't what they are being described as, or when you're arriving at the scene, they're really not measuring up to what they were originally reported as, kind of false flag incidents, if you will. And this again can happen. A lot of times it's with youth that are involved. They appear like they're fighting, and maybe they're just play fighting with each other, or they're just naturally being somewhat disruptive. And you don't want to confuse that with an actual fight or an altercation. Both of them are obviously nuisance issues that need to be dealt with, but it's not of the serious nature of potentially people intentionally trying to hurt each other, as opposed to maybe play fighting or just generally being disruptive, if you will. Responding to domestic incidents are one of the most volatile and dangerous situations for police officers and potentially for security. Every year, domestic incidents account for 10 to 15% of line-of-duty deaths for police officers. They also constitute about a third of total calls received by the police. Domestic arguments are personal in nature. They involve a range of emotions from anger, fear, embarrassment, resentment, remorse even. Persons involved often act completely out of character. Responding guards must be cautious, as either of the two feuding parties may suddenly decide the matter is personal and may turn on you, the people that are responding, to help them. They also might have second thoughts about getting the person that they're arguing with at that particular time in trouble, or getting separated from them. So just watch out for all of these things as you're arriving. When you do arrive or are advised of a domestic incident, if it's verbal at the time before you're even approaching it, it's not a major disruption of the peace or the public, it might be best to try to observe that from a distance and let the parties resolve the matter on their own before you're going in and getting involved in that kind of situation. If it does escalate, you of course want to get immediate backup on the way. And also consider your environment as well that you're responding to, your threat environment. What is also present there? Are there other weapons around? Are there utensils or tools that somebody could grab in that type of an argument? And if you are able to separate two feuding parties, try to do it in a manner, again, where they're not facing each other, so they're not continually going back at each other. They're not able to see the reactions of somebody else. They may still be able to hear them. And again, especially in a domestic incident, you want to completely separate them apart, where the one person is taken away, and then that causes the other person to be upset and potentially act out against you. So on to property crimes, which are a category of crime usually involving private property that includes, among other crimes, burglary, larceny, theft, motor vehicle theft, arsons, shopliftings, and vandalism. Property crime is a crime to obtain money, property, or some other benefit. In a retail environment, you're normally talking about retail theft, which is shoplifting. It generally includes items that are removed from a business, but it also can be other methods used to remove property or money from individuals. It could be fraud or criminal impersonation, using somebody else's credentials, maybe somebody else's credit card. Theft of services, which is somebody failing to pay for a service. If you're at a restaurant and you don't pay for the meal that you just had, you walked out on it, that's what we call theft of services. Theft of mislaid property generally occurs when items are accidentally left unattended and they're removed without the owner's permission. Some common examples might be wallets, cell phones, other packages, or personal property that's left behind. Thefts can occur when items are removed from parked or unattended vehicles, or even a vehicle being removed entirely, a motor vehicle theft. Burglary, also referred to as breaking and entering or illegal entry into the building for the purpose of committing a theft, is potentially something that a security officer can respond to as well. This might particularly happen at a property when it's closed, let's say in an after-hours shift and whatnot, and it's something that you absolutely want to be mindful of as you're doing your rounds. If you're noticing any kinds of forced entry, or you believe that somebody might be in the particular area or the building, let's say the door, was locked or appeared to be locked the first time that you had checked it, and now it doesn't appear to be, or it's unlocked. That is something where you should step back, have law enforcement arrive and clear that scene, make sure that there isn't an actual burglary that's taking place right then and there, because you don't want to walk into the middle of that, especially if you're alone as a security officer. Most burglaries don't involve or don't escalate to violence. However, if you interrupt somebody that's in the middle of that crime, that potentially could lead to that. So you want to be careful about your approach to those scenes. You also want to understand there might be former employees who still have access to the building. They have keys, they have access cards, they may be able to get in there as well. Oftentimes we know and understand that burglaries occur from people that know the property or have worked there or associated with it before. You also want to concentrate on crime scene preservation. You want to be notifying the owners and managers of that property so they can come down and truly verify has property been removed and anything else like that. Although we touched on drug use in our medical section, we also need to consider the quality of life impact their presence may be presenting for our properties. Some drug-related activity might include persons selling, purchasing, or providing illegal drugs to others, or attempting to steal or remove them from other persons who are also using drugs. This might also potentially involve cases of overdosing and poisoning, like we talked about in our medical section. Even illegal drug paraphernalia, items that are associated with this activity that may be left unattended or found by security personnel. The law in Delaware relating to marijuana use and possession recently changed in Delaware. You can actually possess or even transport what the law defines as personal use quantities of cannabis or marijuana, if you will. That amounts to, legally, not that you're going to be measuring it or anything else, 1 ounce of the leaf, 12 grams or less of hash or other forms of concentrate, and up to 750 milligrams of pot edibles, such as gummies. Regardless, we point this out because you may come across this activity on your property, and people may have a conception of it's okay to do it, it's not okay to do it. You may get it from both ends, from a complaint end and from observing it. What you want to know is how your property ownership and management see this, how they want you to enforce it. It doesn't mean simply because the law might allow it that it is going to be permitted on your property. Again, property owners can prohibit this. They can see this potentially as a quality of life issue, if you will. So just make sure you're gauging, how they want this interpreted and enforced on your particular property. You do want to be observant for organized drug activity that might potentially be occurring on your property. Maybe out in the parking lot there are people meeting and congregating and conducting sales, hand-to-hand sales, or maybe you're seeing vehicles pull up and there's transactions going on there. You absolutely want to be pointing this out to supervisors and management personnel. It does happen in areas that are open to the public, people that are going to meet and have drug exchanges. That's, they meet in public places just like everybody else does. It's not that it's, unlikely to happen, all right? But if you're seeing patterns of this occur, if you're seeing this occur in the same areas all the time, maybe even the same people, This is certainly something where management should be involving law enforcement. A property does not want to become susceptible to the idea of allowing and permitting this openly without it being checked. That could lead to obviously other issues for the property. If one thing goes unaddressed, there are other crimes that potentially could happen. And a lot of times with illegal drug activity, it leads to other crimes. It can lead to, people committing robberies and assaults and so on and so forth. So this is definitely something that the property wants to keep an eye on. And lastly, regarding illegal drug activity, is your personal safety. Security guards should avoid touching or disturbing illegal drug products unless somebody's personal safety is in immediate jeopardy. In other words, you have to get it away from somebody from the public or children that might be in the area or others. But disposal or removal of the product should be done in consultation with law enforcement. So we want to add a quick section on security interactions with juveniles and children. In Delaware, they recognize 18 as the age of majority when somebody is legally considered an adult. So we would be talking about people under that age, obviously. And we could be referencing a few things. Juveniles and children in medical situations, which are different than response for adults. And also if they are the victim of a crime or they're in the area or in the presence of adults that are committing crimes, or maybe they are actually the persons that are committing the crimes as well. So just a few things that we'll take a look at here. So regarding medical responses, they can be different depending on what's going on with a child or an infant even. Just recall what those procedures might be that are different. Again, any kind of formalized first aid and CPR and AED training should hopefully evaluate these even further. But an AED, for instance, if you were using that on a small child, there are special adapters inside the AEDs for small children. Your choking response to an infant for sure is different. So just be aware of these certain nuances that are different as far as your medical response for children and juveniles. So parents or guardians that are attempting to discipline their children, sometimes, if a child acts up in a public area, a parent or guardian has to take some action right then and there. Be careful of what you're observing. And sometimes you even want to get a second opinion on some of these things, and you might be often getting this from a complaint perspective where somebody believes that a parent or guardian maybe is using unnecessary or excessive physical force to control children. These incidents can be complicated. One person's idea of discipline is another person's idea of abuse. So you definitely want to get some perspective on this, maybe even have somebody, another security person or management person, make sure that they're seeing, what you're seeing. Obviously, if you have anything that's overt, a child that's in the care of a person who might be intoxicated or unstable, or they're acting out or they're being violent, or it's a danger for that child to be with that person, then that's something where we immediately need to get law enforcement to interact with as well. In other situations we could be talking about, there are times when people that are committing criminal acts, shopliftings, maybe using illegal drugs, they have children with them. It's an awful situation, obviously. And, if you're interacting in those situations, you're able to separate the child. Just make sure that you're doing so, obviously, in a professional and a caring manner. The child should never be mixed up with, what the parent or the guardian may be doing that's illegal or improper. And lastly, if you're dealing with children or juveniles that are accused of criminal activity, and it does happen. I've seen shoplifters as young as 10, 11 years of age. And oftentimes a lot of some of the criminal activity that's going to occur on your property is going to be precipitated or at least involve juveniles as well, so something to keep in mind as well. In Delaware, if a juvenile is prosecuted, they normally would go to family court. And in family court, the way that it's designed is that everybody is set to act as a advocate for the child. In other words, their goal is to try to keep that child out of the criminal justice system if possible. Now, there are very serious crimes if a child or a juvenile commits that they can be charged as an adult, but they are obviously very rare circumstances. But again, in Delaware, we try to keep children away from actually being formally prosecuted to that level.